Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today to speak about a truth that is often misunderstood, a truth that could transform the way you see the trials in your life. Have you ever wondered why you face struggles, hardships, and challenges right before your breakthrough? Let me tell you this, what you may see as an obstacle could very well be God's divine test. The Bible is clear. God often prepares His people for greater blessings through trials, testing their faith, their character, and their trust in Him. So, if you are in the midst of a storm, feeling the weight of the struggle, I urge you to look carefully. For it is in these moments that God is shaping you for what is to come. He is refining you, making you ready for your breakthrough. But the question is, how will you recognize the signs that God is testing you? Stay with me, for today we will uncover those signs. And by the end of this message, you will see your struggles in a whole new light through the lens of God's divine purpose. In our lives, there are moments when it feels like everything we are striving for is just within reach. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel and we feel that we are on the verge of a breakthrough. But strangely enough, it is often at this very moment that the opposition seems to rise up against us in ways we never expected. The attacks, the obstacles, the setbacks, the discouragement, they all seem to hit harder, faster, and from all directions. You may wonder why this is happening, especially when you are so close to achieving something monumental. Could it be that the closer you get to your breakthrough, the greater the resistance? The answer, my friends, is yes. In the spiritual realm, when you are about to break through, the enemy doesn't want you to succeed. The resistance you face is not merely circumstantial or coincidental. It is a sign that you are entering a territory of divine favor, a place where God's promises are about to unfold in your life. The opposition you encounter is often a reflection of how close you are to experiencing the fullness of what God has for you. It is a tactic of the enemy to try to distract, discourage, and derail you from your destiny. But it is also a sign that God is preparing something great for you on the other side of the struggle. Think about the story of the Israelites when they were on the verge of entering the Promised Land. After years of wandering in the wilderness, they finally reached the edge of the land that God had promised to them. But as they approached, they encountered fierce opposition from the Canaanites who were entrenched in the land. The enemy was not going to just give up the territory that had been promised to the people of God. And yet this resistance was exactly what God had forewarned them about. It was not a sign of failure or defeat. It was a sign that they were closer than ever to their breakthrough. God was preparing them for victory, but first they had to face the giants of the land. This principle is not unique to the Israelites. It is a pattern that we see time and time again throughout the Bible. The closer someone gets to their breakthrough, the more fierce and intense the opposition becomes. Consider the story of David. Before he became the king of Israel, he faced an immense amount of opposition from King Saul, who grew increasingly jealous and threatened by David's success. David, despite being anointed by God and chosen for greatness, spent years running for his life. He experienced betrayal, attacks, and constant persecution, but all of this opposition, all of this resistance was not a sign that David was out of favor with God. On the contrary, it was a sign that his breakthrough was imminent. Resistance can come in many forms. It can come through the people around you, the circumstances you find yourself in, or even through your own inner struggles. It can manifest as negative comments, attacks on your character, sudden financial setbacks, health challenges, or a deep sense of discouragement that seems to follow you wherever you go. It can feel like you are swimming upstream, fighting against a current that won't let you go. The pressure can feel unbearable at times, and it may cause you to question whether you're on the right path. But here is where the truth lies. Opposition is often the confirmation that you are on the verge of something extraordinary. It is a sign that you are approaching the moment when God's promises will break through into your reality. Think about a woman in labor. As the baby gets closer to being born, the contractions grow stronger and more frequent. The pain intensifies, but it is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something incredible is about to come into the world. In the same way, the opposition you face as you near your breakthrough is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you are about to give birth to something new in your life, something that will bring glory to God and fulfillment to your destiny. At times, it may feel like the weight of the opposition is too much to bear, but it is important to remember that God does not allow us to face challenges without equipping us to overcome them. The intensity of the battle is often proportional to the magnitude of the blessing on the other side. The more resistance you encounter, the more you can be assured that God is preparing you for something big. It's easy to be tempted to quit, to give up, or to shrink back when faced with resistance. But this is precisely the moment when you must press forward, trusting that God is in control and that His plan for your life is unfolding. Remember, every breakthrough is preceded by a battle. Every victory is preceded by a fight. The opposition you face is not meant to destroy you, it is meant to propel you toward your breakthrough. It is meant to sharpen your faith, strengthen your resolve, and prepare you for what God has promised. So when you find yourself facing opposition, instead of retreating or becoming discouraged, stand firm and recognize it for what it truly is, a sign that your breakthrough is near. Your resistance is not a reflection of failure, it is a confirmation of your victory in Christ. When we are on the verge of a breakthrough, one of the most difficult tests we can face is the overwhelming feeling that everything is too much to handle. It seems like every aspect of our lives, our emotions, our relationships, our responsibilities becomes heavier, and the weight of it all threatens to crush us. We may find ourselves asking, why does it feel like I can't take it anymore? Why does it seem like the pressure is too intense just before my breakthrough? This is one of the signs that God is testing you before your breakthrough, and it is crucial to understand that these feelings are not necessarily a sign of failure or that you are on the wrong path. Feeling overwhelmed is often a necessary part of the process that God uses to prepare us for something greater. In fact, it is often a clear indication that you are close to receiving what God has promised. When you're about to receive something significant, it is common for God to allow you to feel the full extent of the pressure, the exhaustion, and the burden. This is not because He wants to harm you, but because He is refining you. The intensity of the moment is a reflection of the incredible blessing and purpose that awaits you on the other side. Consider the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. In His final moments before His crucifixion, He was overwhelmed by sorrow to the point of sweating blood. He knew the immense sacrifice that lay ahead of Him, and the pressure was nearly unbearable. But it was through that intense moment of overwhelming sorrow that He was able to fulfill the will of the Father and make way for the ultimate breakthrough of salvation for all of humanity. If Jesus Himself experienced moments of feeling overwhelmed as He faced His destiny, we can take comfort in knowing that these moments are not signs of defeat, but rather signs that we are about to experience a powerful breakthrough. Throughout the Bible, we see individuals who were overwhelmed by their circumstances just before their breakthrough. Take, for example, the prophet Elijah. After a great victory over the prophets of Baal, Elijah found himself fleeing for his life, discouraged and despondent. He was physically and emotionally exhausted, feeling like there was nothing left in him. In that moment, he felt as if he was the only one left who was truly following God, and the pressure of it all felt unbearable. Yet it was in that moment of overwhelming despair that God spoke to Elijah in a still small voice, revealing that the breakthrough was near. God provided Elijah with the strength he needed to continue his mission and made him aware that there were many others who had not bowed to Baal. Elijah's breakthrough was imminent, but first he had to face the overwhelming weight of the situation. It is easy to think that when things get too overwhelming, it's a sign that we should give up. But in reality, this is when God often shows up in powerful ways. The pressure you feel is not meant to destroy you, it is meant to prepare you for the future. God uses these moments of overwhelming stress to test your faith, your endurance, and your reliance on Him. The burden you feel is not yours to carry alone. It is a reminder to lean into God's strength, to allow Him to carry you through the storm. When we feel overwhelmed, we often try to solve everything on our own. We believe that if we just work harder, push through, or rely on our own strength, we can overcome the burden. But God's plan is different. He allows us to feel the weight of the pressure so that we can learn to rely on Him fully. These moments are designed to break our dependence on ourselves and to teach us how to trust in God's provision and timing. When we reach the point where we feel like we can't take any more, we begin to realize that it is only by God's grace and strength that we can move forward. Think about the Apostle Paul. He was a man who experienced intense trials and challenges, yet he continued to press on toward his calling. In his letter to the Corinthians, he spoke of the thorn in the flesh that tormented him, a burden that overwhelmed him. He pleaded with God to remove it, but God's response was clear: "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul learned that in his moments of overwhelming weakness, God's strength was made evident. It was in those moments that God's power was fully displayed, and Paul's faith grew stronger. This is often how God works in our lives as well. He uses the overwhelming moments to show us that His grace is enough and He is the one who carries us through. Overwhelm is a test of endurance. It is a moment where God is asking you to trust Him even when you can't see the way forward. The pressure is not meant to break you, but to mold you into the person who can handle the greatness He has planned for you. When you're feeling overwhelmed, don't resist it. Instead, lean into God, knowing that He is with you in the struggle. He is not distant in your pain. He is refining you and preparing you for what is to come. The breakthrough is closer than you think, and this moment of pressure is just a sign that God is working in you and through you to bring about something greater than you could ever imagine. When we are praying and seeking God's guidance, we often expect immediate answers to our prayers. We believe that when we ask, God will respond right away, especially when we are desperately seeking a breakthrough. However, there are times in our lives when the answers to our prayers seem delayed, as if God is silent or distant. We may pray fervently, pouring our hearts out to Him, and yet it feels like our requests go unheard. This delay can be one of the most challenging aspects of God's testing before a breakthrough. It can be frustrating, discouraging, and even cause doubt to creep into our minds. But understanding the purpose behind these delays can change the way we approach our prayers and our trust in God's timing. One of the most significant things to understand about God's delays is that they are not a sign of God's absence or lack of concern. God is never distant from us, and He always hears our prayers. The Bible assures us that God listens to the cries of His people. However, His timing is different from ours. While we may want an answer immediately, God sees the bigger picture. He understands the perfect timing for each of our requests, and sometimes delays are part of the process of preparing us for the breakthrough that is to come. Consider the story of Daniel in the Bible. Daniel prayed for an answer to a specific request, and for 21 days there was no response. The silence could have led him to believe that God was not listening or that his prayer was not important. But when the angel finally appeared to Daniel, the message was clear. God had heard his prayer from the very first day, but the answer was delayed because of spiritual opposition. The angel had been sent immediately, but it took time to overcome the obstacles in the spiritual realm. Daniel's prayer had been answered, but the process of receiving the answer took longer than he expected. This delay in answering prayer is often a part of God's testing. He allows us to wait because He is testing our patience, our faith, and our trust in Him. Will we continue to pray even when it feels like nothing is happening? Will we trust that God is still at work even when we can't see the immediate evidence of it? These delays teach us to rely on God's perfect timing and to trust that He is working in ways that we cannot fully understand. It is through waiting that our faith is refined and we learn to lean not on our own understanding, but on God's wisdom. In addition, delays in prayer can serve as a way to build our endurance. When we don't get an immediate answer, it forces us to persist in prayer and to remain consistent in our faith. God is not just concerned with the outcome of our prayers, He is concerned with our growth throughout the process. He wants us to become people who can endure trials and wait on His timing. The Apostle Paul talks about how endurance develops character and how that character leads to hope. The delay in receiving an answer is not a denial, it is part of God's process of building endurance in us. Think about the example of Abraham. God promised him that he would become the father of many nations, but the fulfillment of that promise was delayed for many years. Abraham was already an old man by the time he finally saw the beginning of that promise come to pass. During the years of waiting, Abraham was tested and his faith was strengthened. God's delay in fulfilling His promise was not a sign of rejection, it was a test of faith and trust. Abraham had to wait, sometimes impatiently, but in the end, the promise was fulfilled in a way that brought glory to God. Another key aspect of delays in prayer is that they often teach us the importance of surrendering our will to God's will. When we pray, we often have a specific outcome in mind, but God may have a different plan. The delay in answering prayer can serve as an opportunity for us to surrender our desires and trust that God knows what is best for us. We may not understand why our breakthrough is delayed or why God's answer is not what we expected, but we can trust that His plans are better than ours. This is an essential part of spiritual growth, learning to submit our will to God's will and trusting that He is leading us in the right direction, even when we don't fully understand the journey. The Bible is full of promises that encourage us to keep praying, even when it feels like our prayers are delayed. Jesus tells us in the book of Matthew to ask, seek, and knock, promising that those who do will receive answers. The Apostle Paul also encourages us to pray without ceasing, knowing that God hears our prayers and is faithful to answer them in His perfect time. The delay is not a denial, it is part of God's process of bringing us closer to His will in perfect timing. As we continue to wait for answers to our prayers, we are also reminded of the importance of trust. We must trust that God's timing is always perfect, even when we don't understand it. Delayed answers to prayer test our trust in God's sovereignty and His goodness. It is easy to trust God when things are going well, but it is in the delays and the waiting that our trust is truly tested. And it is through these moments of waiting that God works in us, refining our faith and preparing us for the breakthrough that will come in His time. Sometimes as we walk through life, we find ourselves in situations where progress seems impossible. We may feel like we've been working toward our goals for years without seeing any tangible results. It feels as though the efforts we've made, the prayers we've prayed, and the steps we've taken have all been in vain. Despite our best efforts, we may not see any visible progress, and this can be one of the most challenging tests God places in our lives before a breakthrough. It is during these times that we must remember that just because we can't see progress doesn't mean it isn't happening. In fact, when we are closest to our breakthrough, it's often the times when progress is least visible that God is working the most behind the scenes. This period of unseen progress can be frustrating as we struggle to understand why things are not moving as we expected. We may question God's timing and wonder if we're on the right path. Yet the truth is that God is always at work, even when we don't see the immediate results of our efforts. This period of hidden progress is a part of God's process of preparing us for what is to come. Take, for example, the story of Joseph. Joseph was a young man with a dream from God, a dream that promised him a future of greatness. However, instead of experiencing immediate success, Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, and later imprisoned under false accusations. During all of this time, it seemed as though his dreams were slipping further and further out of reach. Joseph had no visible progress to show for the years of hardship he endured. But even though Joseph could not see the outcome, God was working in the background. Every trial he faced was a step toward his ultimate purpose. God was shaping Joseph's character, developing his leadership skills, and preparing him for the great responsibility that would come when he eventually rose to power in Egypt. The progress was hidden from Joseph's eyes, but it was happening nonetheless. When God finally revealed the fulfillment of Joseph's dreams, it became clear that all the invisible work had been preparing him for the greatness that God had promised. This concept of unseen progress is also evident in the natural world. Consider the growth of a seed. When a seed is planted in the ground, it does not immediately sprout and grow into a plant. For a time, there is no visible change. The seed is buried beneath the soil, seemingly inactive. But even though we cannot see it, the seed is undergoing a transformation. It is breaking down, absorbing nutrients, and preparing to push through the soil and into the light. Eventually, after a period of unseen growth, the plant emerges. It may not be a full-grown tree right away, but it is proof that progress has been made, even when it was invisible to the naked eye. Similarly, in our lives, God is often working in ways that we cannot see. The prayers we've been praying, the steps we've taken, the work we've put in, they are all contributing to our growth and preparation, even if there are no immediate signs of progress. God is using these unseen moments to shape us, refine us, and position us for the breakthrough that is coming. We may not always understand the process, but we can trust that God is working everything together for our good. Sometimes, God allows us to go through seasons of hidden progress so that we will learn to trust in His plan and timing. If we were to see the immediate results of our actions, we might become complacent, thinking that it is all due to our own efforts. But by allowing us to experience periods where nothing seems to be happening, God is teaching us to rely on Him and trust that He is in control. These seasons of waiting and unseen progress build our faith and help us develop patience, knowing that God's timing is always perfect. In these moments, it is essential to remember that God is never idle. Even when we cannot see the movement, He is always at work. We must resist the temptation to measure progress by visible results alone. God is not limited by what we can see. He is working in ways that we may not even comprehend. His work is often unseen, but it is no less real. Just because we can't see the progress doesn't mean it isn't happening. We must remain faithful in the waiting, knowing that God's work is unfolding in His time and in His way. Consider the Israelites as they wandered in the desert. They spent 40 years in a place of hidden progress, a place where it seemed like they were not moving forward. The journey was long, the hardships were many, and the promise of the promised land seemed like a distant dream. Yet during those 40 years, God was preparing them. He was teaching them to trust in Him, to rely on His provision, and to understand that His timing was perfect. Though it seemed like nothing was happening, God was working in their hearts and minds, preparing them for the moment when they would step into the land He had promised them. When we face seasons of unseen progress, we must remind ourselves that God is always at work. Just because we don't see the results doesn't mean that we are not moving closer to our breakthrough. The breakthrough is coming, and even in the silence and in the waiting, God is working. These hidden seasons are not wasted. They are filled with purpose. As God is shaping us into the people we need to be to handle the blessings that are on the way. It may not be visible right now, but rest assured, progress is happening in ways we can't see, and God is preparing us for the fullness of what He has in store. One of the most challenging experiences we face in life is being confronted with opposition, especially when we are on the verge of a breakthrough. Opposition can come in many forms: people who don't understand our vision, obstacles that seem insurmountable, and situations that seem impossible to overcome. These moments can feel discouraging, and we may even question whether we are on the right path. However, one of the signs that God is testing us before our breakthrough is the appearance of intense opposition. It is during these times that we are called to stand firm, trust in God's plan, and recognize that the opposition is not a sign of failure, but rather a sign that we are closer to the breakthrough than we realize. In the Bible, we see numerous examples of individuals who face great opposition just before they experience their breakthrough. Take, for instance, the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was given a vision to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, a task that seemed impossible given the circumstances. He faced immediate opposition from powerful figures who sought to stop his work. They mocked him, tried to intimidate him, and attempted to create division among the people working with him. Yet, despite the relentless opposition, Nehemiah refused to be distracted or discouraged. He knew that the opposition was a sign that his mission was from God and that the breakthrough was near. Instead of retreating in fear, he pressed forward with determination, relying on God's strength. Ultimately, Nehemiah and his team completed the task, and the walls of Jerusalem were rebuilt. The opposition they faced was a sign that the breakthrough was coming, and through perseverance and trust in God, they were able to overcome it. Opposition can also serve as a refining process. When we are faced with challenges, we are forced to dig deeper into our faith, and it is often in these moments that we experience personal growth and strength. The Apostle Paul provides a powerful example of this in his own life. Paul endured tremendous opposition throughout his ministry, beatings, imprisonment, and constant threats to his life. Yet in the midst of this opposition, he wrote some of his most profound letters, filled with encouragement and insight into God's plan for his life. Paul's response to opposition was not to give up, but to press forward with greater faith. He understood that opposition was a test that would refine him and bring him closer to the fulfillment of God's purpose for his life. In his letter to the Romans, he wrote, "We also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope." Through the opposition he faced, Paul's faith was tested, strengthened, and ultimately made him a more powerful instrument for God's work. There are also times when the opposition we face is spiritual in nature. The enemy often intensifies his attacks when he knows that a breakthrough is near. Just as he tempted Jesus in the wilderness, the enemy will try to sow doubt, fear, and confusion in our minds, hoping to derail us from our mission. These spiritual attacks are designed to weaken our faith and cause us to lose hope. However, it is in these moments that we must recognize the opposition for what it is, a sign that we are on the right track. When we are walking in God's will, we can expect resistance from the enemy, but we can also take comfort in knowing that God is greater than any opposition we face. The Bible tells us that no weapon formed against us will prosper, and we can stand firm in the knowledge that the victory has already been won through Christ. Opposition is also an opportunity for us to grow in resilience. It teaches us how to stand firm in the face of adversity and not be swayed by the opinions of others or the circumstances around us. There will always be critics, people who doubt our vision or tell us that we can't succeed. The temptation is to listen to these voices and allow them to shake our confidence. However, God's word encourages us to remain steadfast and not be moved by the opinions of others. In the story of David and Goliath, we see how David, a young shepherd, faced overwhelming opposition in the form of Goliath, a giant warrior who taunted the Israelite army. Despite the ridicule and doubt of others, David stood firm in his faith and trusted that God would deliver him. He did not allow the opposition to deter him from his mission. With unwavering faith, he defeated Goliath and proved that no opposition is too great when we trust in God. It is important to remember that opposition does not indicate that we are on the wrong path. In fact, opposition is often a confirmation that we are walking in the right direction. The enemy only fights against what he perceives as a threat. And if we are facing intense opposition, it may be a sign that we are on the brink of something significant. Just as a woman in labor faces great pain before the birth of a child, we may experience the most intense opposition before the breakthrough comes. However, we can take comfort in knowing that, just like the labor pains give way to the joy of new life, the opposition we face will give way to the breakthrough God has promised. When we face opposition, we must keep our eyes fixed on the goal. It is easy to get distracted by the difficulties we face and lose sight of the promise. But we must remember that opposition is temporary and God's plan for us is eternal. He will provide the strength, wisdom, and perseverance we need to overcome every obstacle. We do not fight this battle alone. God is with us every step of the way. As we press forward in faith, we can be confident that the breakthrough is coming and the opposition we face will only serve to strengthen us for the victory that lies ahead. There are times in our lives when we feel the weight of our circumstances pressing down on us. We may face setbacks, disappointments, and even situations that seem completely beyond our control. During these moments, it's natural to wonder if our breakthrough is ever going to come. It can feel as though we've been stuck in the same place for too long, unable to move forward or make progress. However, one of the signs that God is testing us before our breakthrough is when we feel as though we are being stretched beyond our limits. This stretching is not a sign of failure, rather it is part of the process of preparation that God uses to expand our capacity for the breakthrough that is coming. When we experience periods of being stretched, it often feels uncomfortable. We may be called to do things that we have never done before. We may find ourselves in situations that push us to our limits. It is in these moments that we must remember that God does not stretch us to break us. Instead, He is expanding us to prepare us for the greater things He has in store. Just as a rubber band is stretched to hold more, God is stretching us to increase our capacity to handle the blessings, responsibilities, and opportunities that will come with our breakthrough. We are not being tested to see if we will fail. We are being tested to see if we are ready to receive all that God has planned for us. Consider the story of the prophet Elijah. God called Elijah to deliver a powerful message to King Ahab and the people of Israel. At one point, Elijah found himself alone in the wilderness, facing a severe drought and a famine. His faith was tested when God commanded him to go to a widow in Zarephath for sustenance. This widow was struggling herself with just a small amount of flour and oil left, yet Elijah trusted in God's provision and the widow's resources were miraculously multiplied. Elijah's experience in the wilderness was a time of stretching. He had to rely completely on God for his needs, and through that stretching, God was preparing him for the greater work that lay ahead. His faith grew stronger, and his ability to trust God in difficult circumstances was increased. When we are being stretched, it can feel as though we are being tested in ways that are difficult to endure. We may be asked to step out of our comfort zones and take risks that we never imagined. These moments often challenge our belief in ourselves and in God's plan for our lives. But it is in these moments that we must hold on to the truth that God is using the stretching to build our character and expand our capacity for what is to come. The stretching may feel painful, but it is an essential part of the process of transformation. The Apostle Paul talks about how our suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance builds character. It is through the stretching that we develop the resilience and strength we need to face the challenges ahead. At times, the stretching we experience can feel overwhelming. We may feel as though we can't take any more, that we've reached our breaking point. But it is important to remember that God does not give us more than we can handle. The stretching we are going through is designed to build us up, not tear us down. Just as a muscle grows stronger by being stretched and exercised, so too does our faith grow stronger as we endure difficult seasons. The trials and challenges we face are shaping us into the people we need to be in order to fully embrace the breakthrough that God has planned for us. Each stretch, each challenge, each test is a part of the greater process of preparing us for what is to come. In these moments of stretching, it is essential to remember that God's timing is always perfect. We may feel as though the stretching will never end, but God knows exactly what we need and when we need it. He is never late in bringing our breakthrough. The process may take longer than we expect, but every moment of waiting and stretching is working to refine us and prepare us for the greater things that God has in store. Our role is to remain faithful, to trust in His process, and to continue to press forward even when it feels difficult. The stretching is not permanent, but the results of that stretching, strength, perseverance, and faith will stay with us long after the trial is over. Just as a potter stretches and molds clay to create a beautiful vessel, so too is God shaping us. The process may feel uncomfortable, but it is through the pressure and the stretching that we are transformed into the vessel that God can use for His purposes. We may not always understand why we are being stretched or how long the process will take, but we can trust that God is in control and that He is using the stretching to prepare us for the breakthrough that is on the way. When we feel as though we are being stretched beyond our limits, it is essential to remember that this is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that God is preparing us for something greater. We are being stretched because God is expanding our capacity to receive all that He has promised. We must trust the process, knowing that the stretching is only temporary, but the results will last for a lifetime. Our breakthrough is coming, and the stretching we are experiencing is a necessary part of the preparation. We are being made ready to step into the fullness of what God has in store for us, and we can trust that with each stretch we are becoming stronger, more resilient, and more capable of handling the blessings and opportunities that await.